Okay, so this is for tourism. So we will be looking at the partial papers, all the various types of open-ended question that you may encounter for tourism. So bear in mind, this is from 2016 all the way to 2020. As you can see, we have got tourism OEQ every single year. So is it possible that you don't encounter tourism questions for your exam? No, right? So whether you like it or not, this is part and parcel of something that you need to be aware of and you need to prepare for. So first and foremost, right, let's take a look at the very first question here. So the first question talks about tourists. Okay, this is a very unique one. This is a little bit different because you look at it very carefully, right? It says all tourists want destinations with beautiful sceneries. Okay, so when you think about it, which part of the syllabus document is this actually from? This is actually dealing with the types of tourism. Okay, so this is very unique because this doesn't deal with an area that has a common word discuss. So you have to understand that for the tourism component, this is also another area where sometimes Cambridge will be a little bit strange, right? So this one over here, the type of tourist activities is an explain command word, but where are we looking for? We're looking for the categories, okay, the types of tourist attractions offered. So this idea here is that the statement here actually seeks to put a point across that every location that tourists go to will have beautiful scenery. Okay, so is that true? So what can we look at then? Then of course if you look at this, right, first one, places of scenic beauty, this will definitely be your given factor. So my given factor will have to be, I repeat, it has to be scenic beauty. Okay, so with scenic beauty as my given factor, what am I looking for then? Okay, uh, talk about scenic beauty, talk about the fact that it has to be natural. Okay, what is the type of things that have to be there? You can talk about in terms of honeypot tourism, okay, things that we've already covered earlier last year when we were talking about, or earlier this year, sorry, when we were talking about tourism. Okay, so honeypot tourism, natural beauty, these are all important things that you need to talk about in your case study here, right? Of course, your specific case study, what we're looking for here, in terms of examples, you can of course use what is given here. You can talk about Grand Canyon. Okay, you can talk about your whichever one you like, Niagara Falls, right? These are all fine as long as they are largely scenic beauty sites. Now, what can my contrast factors be then? My first contrast factor, okay, the first one that can be used against this would be probably I want to go against this, right? So how do I approach this? If the keyword here is all, as long as I prove that there are other types that don't have beautiful scenery, right? Then you're done. Okay, you've proven it, so your assessment can be very clear. So what can I choose then? If you take a look at places with good facilities, there are some things that would not be beautiful sceneries at all. So if you look at medical tourism, okay, medical tourism, medical hub, right, Singapore, or you're going to talk about Bumrungrad in Bangkok, or you're going to talk about the Korean ones, then is the beautiful scenery actually part of this equation when you're looking at that kind of a tourist? So I will look at medical tourists. Okay, so medical, which is under good facilities. Now, I would highlight what the essence of this is. Okay, is for medical purpose. Okay, tendency would be the person will be in the hospital. Okay, hospital, right? There may not be beautiful scenery. Right, so this is important. Then your examples and all. So with these two alone, you can actually uh, push off and say that you disagree because the presence of medical tourism seems to disagree with that. Alternatively, you can also look for other types that have great sense of beauty, but that may not be the emphasis of the thing. So if you're looking at, let's not talk about heritage. Okay, heritage is one much clearer one. Let's do something that's a bit more difficult. So we look at film induced, right? If we look at film induced tourism, film induced, let's take a look at this. Right, so if you're looking at film induced, is the scenery the key? Okay, that must come out. It isn't, right? So if you're looking at film induced, actually it is the experience that you want. It isn't, I repeat, it isn't the beautiful scenery. So it is coincidental that the many times when you're talking about film induced tourism, unless you're in a major city itself, there will be some sort of scenery involved. But It is not the key, right? So it's very possible to have engaged in film-induced tourism without uh, having beautiful scenery as your backdrop. Okay, so assessment paragraph, very simple. This can be yes, no, right? Most of it, if you think about it very carefully, the logical answer is you think no lah. Okay, so this is important. This is strange because command word is explained here. So I want to repeat, command word over here is explained, but it is an open-ended question. So like I've mentioned this many times before, it doesn't mean that when you look at syllabus document, it says that explain, they cannot test you as an open-ended question. You think about this portion of tourism, right? When we were covering this, it was very clear, very clear that every single one of the type of tourism, you had a clear example that you could use as a OEQ, okay? And so it has come out before in Cambridge exams, okay? So that would be the first question. I think that was 2016. This will be 2017 paper. Right, 2017 paper, what do we have? Right, introduction of budget airlines is the main reason. So looking at budget airlines, main reason, growth of international tourism. So once again, this is 8 marks here. The mark is missing. Let's put that back in. So what are we looking for? We're looking for growth. And once again, what command word is this? It is again explain. But you're looking at reasons for growth. It's an explain. So what think that again, can we do this as an open-ended question? We can, because when we're looking at all these three types, changing profile of tourists, destination factors, we were all given examples for each of these subcategories. So what would be my given factor then? My given factor will of course be, right, better and affordable transportation, because we're looking at budget airlines. You can also focus on online booking of tickets, which is the key way that you can book for budget airlines, right? But bear in mind what this under this is better technology. So the factor is development of technology. So what are my other factors I can think about? I can of course look at the first contrast being, okay, the first contrast factor being a demand factor. Pick one, right? Be DI, leisure time, or changing lifestyle, whichever one you will want. Okay, then you can go on and talk about destination factors as the other one. Now, as we were discussing this earlier on, right, I actually mentioned this in class that if you look at it very carefully, right, disposable income and leisure time, these are your two fundamental factors that allow people to go on tours. If you don't have money or you don't have the time, you can't, regardless of whatever developments in technology, whatever kind of lifestyle you have, right, whatever kind of destination, how attractive the destination is, you cannot travel unless you have these two. So when looking at it, this is going to be my key. Okay, so if this is going to be my key, introduction of budget airlines will not be the main reason for the growth of international tourism. It cannot be. Right? It cannot be the main reason, because the main reason has to be demand factors. It has to be because people have more money, people have more time, so therefore they are able to engage in more international tourism. So that is very important. Now, you work with this in mind. Your examples need to fill in accordingly to this. This is very important. So this one has a pretty clear stand. Now, is there a way to work around this? Of course. If I do not want to do this, right? I do not want to be locked into disposable income or leisure time. You're unsure about how you want to write the assessment paragraph. You want to have a more open kind of a discussion. Then you can, instead of that, you may want to do two destination factors. Okay, so attractions or access to information, these allow for more people to know more, to be interested more about certain places, and then therefore they want to go to those places internationally, and this will lead to the growth in the international tourism. So if also not me, I'm pretty fine with it, but if you are really worried about doing demand factors, right, because you're not very confident in your ability to argue or to clearly illustrate that strength in that two factors, then don't, right? Then you deal with, it's okay to deal with destination factors. But bear in mind, if you are doing that, then your stand can be, I agree, budget airlines is the more important one. You need to tell me why. Okay, why is budget airlines more important than the other two factors that you have listed, be it destination factors or other one other technology factor. Okay, so it's your choice. It's your choice. I'm not stating here that you must use demand factors. You do not, but personally, I think it's a lot easier to use the demand factors because it's a very much stronger factor. Uh, it's a lot easier to work my assessment around that. But once again, OEQ is testing of your ability to analyze as well as present a particular stand with supporting evidence and examples. So there is actually always more or less an allowance for you to squirm around if you get what I mean. Third one that we're going to look at here, once again, same part. The following year they had another one, back to back years they're testing the same area here, and they were testing an area that was explained. Okay, so now they have moved on. They want to do specifically online booking of tours. So once again, it is again developments in technology. So very similar to the earlier one. The given factor is still tech. Okay, but specifically we're looking at online booking. Okay, so when you're looking at online booking, what is the perk in it? Okay, number one perk that you must talk about is lower price. Okay, second thing you must talk about is lower difficulty. So it becomes easier to book, cheaper to book, right? So once again, what are you going to contrast with? Demand factors? Okay, see, I seem to be inclined towards using demand factors as my contrast because to me, really, I think it's a lot easier to work around it and it's easier to do an assessment based on that. Okay, so I can have destination as my second contrast. And I'll be wondering why is it that I'm doing three because it's the main reason. Okay, if you have two, it will be the more important reason, not the main one. So like best an indicator, main reason would indicate that I would need to give them three. Okay, so the examples will be very similar to the previous one that we just did. But I'm not going to be able to point too much. This one similarly, if you look at it, it's really very similar. Right, so back to back years, this is possible. Right, not very likely, but it's possible. They've done this before. So this would have been the 2018 paper, right? 2018 paper, and 2017 would have been on the budget airlines. Okay, then they move on, slight variation to 2018 for this. And the next one, 2019 paper, what did we deal with? They wanted to look at environmental disadvantage outweigh advantages. Okay, so what are we looking at? We're looking at not only the impact of tourism, but specifically the environmental impact of tourism only. We're looking at advantage versus disadvantage. Okay, so if you look at what we have here, the easiest thing to commit that many students will just jump onto will be volume comparison. So I have 5 disadvantage and 1 advantage. So definitely, yes, I will agree with this, but you can't do that. Okay, so what we need to do once again is be very careful. Your given factor is the disadvantage and advantage. Your listed factors are these two. You have to give me an advantage and a disadvantage. Must you start with the advantage first? No, but since there's only one, I will talk about this. Okay, so your real world example, very important here. Okay, conservation of natural environments. I would definitely bring in my Waitomo, right? Because this is an example that is inside the textbook, and you've seen a couple of videos on this. I'm pretty sure about that. So the imagery of it should be in your head. So talk about the advantage of it. Okay. Um, your contrast factors. What can we look at? We can of course look at things that are easier to deal with. Okay. Talk about things like vandalism. Okay. Can you remember the example that was shared with you when we were looking at vandalism, right? The Chinese boy, the PRC boy in Luxor, the one who vandalized the temple in Luxor, Egypt. Right. So I think if you work on examples that we can recall, GYPT, okay, it will be a lot easier for us to develop the factor paragraph itself. Okay, destruction of habitat, you can talk about that. You can talk about increased congestion. You can talk about littering and pollution. Right, so the second contrast factor is completely up to you. Which one are you more comfortable with? Okay, if you want to talk about littering, okay, you can talk about your beaches, how the beaches are being polluted. Okay, you want to talk about destruction of habitats, you can talk about how Machu Picchu is being destroyed. Okay, so once again, for this particular one, it is not necessarily a volume thing. Disadvantage you have five, advantage you have one. Therefore, definitely it outweighs. Okay, remember your assessment cannot be volume, cannot be in a numerical advantage. It is a very weak assessment argument here. So what are we looking for then in this case? Look at the scale of the impact here. So if we talk about conservation, what are we conserving? Are we conserving everything? Okay, then natural environment. In the process of conservation, do we actually conserve more or do we actually destroy more to pander to the needs of tourism? Right. So when you're talking about conservation, uh, does vandalism still exist in places where you're doing conservation? Okay, can you really totally control that? Or would it be better if I just seal off the temple? So you think about it in the case of vandalism, your case example of the PRC point, if the Luxor temples are sealed off, they're only available for archaeological research or historical research. No tourist is allowed to visit the place and to explore the place, and then this kind of an incident will never happen. So what kind of a this kind of a disadvantage is pretty massive, right? And it's totally brought about because you want to open the place up for tourism. Okay, so work on that. Work on something that's a scale of impacting or some not just a numerical advantage. The following year, what we had here is developments in technology once again. So you see, this seems to be a problem, right? That Cambridge still cannot find enough evidence that Singaporean students are able to do this properly. So they come back to this sector again. Okay. So developments in technology, once again, what are we looking at? You can talk about any one of these three. Okay. Given factor is tech, right? I would still most of the time prefer to talk about something that's more tangible, talk about online booking, okay, or I would sometimes also prefer to talk about budget airlines because for budget airlines it's much easier for you to remember examples of budget airlines, right? And many of us have I don't know, fortunate or unfortunately been have experienced the wonders of traveling budget. So what are the things that you give up on? You should have a personal experience to draw upon. Okay, most of us should have a personal experience to draw upon. So if you do, then working on that would greatly reduce the amount of things you have to memorize, right? So this is actually a great idea to look at. But of course, main reason. So once again, three reasons. What else can we look at under demand factors? Okay, once again, if you can, I will look at both. Okay, and both of them are more important. They are both equally important, so therefore developments in tech cannot be the main reason. Right. So once again, if you look at it, if you're able to handle demand factors and get in your head a couple of examples that we need for demand income, disposable income, who has more disposable income now, what happens with leisure time, what kind of a pivot will allow you to have leisure time, what kind of jobs to what kind of jobs. This would make for a very much clearer assessment paragraph. Okay. So this would be 6, 7, 8, 9, 2019. 2019, the tourism OEQ question was on this part once again. And it's not come out ever since. Okay, it's not have come out ever since. So if you're wondering, wow, this seems like this quite a bit, right? Yes, they used to like this quite a bit, but it's not come out ever since. Okay, so habitually they will continue to test some areas until they find that Singaporean students can do it. You can deal with it well, then there's no need to test you anymore, right? Means we can find some other things to trick you into doing. So for this is 2020. 2020 year itself, they dealt with a different factor. They look at social, cultural advantages outweigh disadvantages. Okay, unlike the earlier one we dealt with, right? This is another area. So for this one, it's very, very clear. There's only one advantage and two disadvantage. So my given factor, or it can be either one of these three, I would most of the time still deal with the one that's singular first. So I will deal with the preservation. Okay. Contrast, I will deal with dilution. Okay, and then increase crime. Right. So I think the trick in this particular one is when you're doing preservation and then later you're doing dilution, right? In your assessment paragraph, you must be very clear that there is preservation, but the preservation that is done is not a complete and wholesale preservation of all, I repeat, all your local customs and heritage values and heritage sites, maybe. It could be a partial one. So you could deal with things like truncation of your customs and practices to pander to the tourist demands. You could also end up with a case like Singapore, where you have massive gentrification of our heritage areas, like Chinatown, Little India, where the buildings are kept intact and they're gazetted, so the facade cannot be changed at all. But none of them are performing their original function in terms of a heritage or local heritage form of use that they were in the past. For example, if you go to Chinatown, you will see more tourist shops, you see more mala shops, then you will actually see shops that sell charcoal, shops that sell provisions, shops that sell Chinese traditional wares and stuff like that. Okay, this gentrification is important when talking about advantage. What we're talking about, sorry, about disadvantage, because this actually shows very clearly the dilution of it. Okay, so that in your assessment paragraph, you have to bring that out. You have to bring that out. That will help you get to the point where although there is advantage, right? I will agree with this statement. The I will disagree with this statement because the disadvantage actually really outweighs the advantage. The end result that you're kept with, right, in terms of dilution of local culture, right, is you're not preserving the culture actually, you're preserving a portion of it. And in turn, it could present a very warped view of what the culture actually is. You go through 2 or 3 generations, right, of population. The subsequent generations may not actually know what this thing actually is used for, what this dance is used for, what this song was used for. It becomes something that is used as a money generating endeavor only. So the dilution far outweighs the advantage in this particular case when we're talking about social cultural advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so preservation, first one, then I will move on to either dilution of local customs, or I'll talk about increase in crime, either one. Okay, what I wouldn't handle a lot will be the crime aspect of it, lah. But you do best please bear in mind your assessment paragraph. You do need to handle all 3 factors that you've talked about. Okay, you cannot like, oh, let's just talk about the preservation versus the dilution. Okay, and then it's clear enough. But you mentioned increased crime earlier on, right? So you also need to tell me further enhancement of the disadvantages, of course, on top of losing a lot of your custom and heritage, right? You also have a consequential increase in crime, and then the overall safety of the environment of the local population is then put in jeopardy as well. Okay, because crime does not pick its victims. Crime victimizes anybody, right? So that's important. Now, the final one that we will look at today will be the 2021 paper. Alright, 2021 paper here talks about tour operators having the greatest responsibility. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the area of managing the impact of tourism. Okay, who are the responsible groups? Okay, the groups. So you have got local communities, visitors, tour operators, right, planning authorities, and NGOs. Now, bear in mind, we've always talked about planning authorities as the shining light in most cases because they do have the most power and they also have the most budget. But is it a must to talk about them? No, if you're very, very unsure or very, very hesitant and you're worried about it, but you have a ability to talk about the other two, okay, besides tour operators, then you can go ahead and drop planning authorities. Just bear in mind that your assessment has to be something that is based on the scale of the impact between these 3 groups that you've mentioned. Okay, so once again, it's not impossible to not deal with planning authorities. The only thing that you definitely compulsory must deal with is tour operators because this is my given factor. Okay, so once again, what will be a given factor? Given factor is written here, so tour operators will be my given factor. Right, always remember later on when you're explaining why operators, when explaining why tour operators are not exactly very effective, you can choose to talk about how they are always held back by the need to service the visitor. Okay, so the employer-employee sort of relationship doesn't allow them full autonomy in enforcing things that may need to be done to protect the environment. Okay, So, what would I normally work with? I would actually work with visitors because visitors are the ones who have the ultimate power in terms of protection. They can choose what to do, what not to do to impact the area. Okay. Then finally, I would do planning authorities. I would definitely like to do planning authorities. But I know there are some of you who prefer doing local communities as well. That is also fine. Okay, or you can do local. Okay, whichever one you are more comfortable with. But remember, assessment paragraph is got to do with scale of impact. Okay, so what are we looking at in terms of scale of impact? The common things that I always mention are okay, how much does it cost to implement? How effective is the policy implementation or the action that's taken, right? How many people is impacted? Okay, these are all three very easy ways of assessing multiple factors across. So once again, this is where we are. These are your OEQs from 2016 to 2021, right? So your work would be to finish one of these OEQs. Okay, now I will need you to do some timing for this, right? OEQ 8 marks. You should not take more than 20 minutes. Okay, so as you're writing, if you take more than 20 minutes, can you do the standard practice of changing your pen, your ink, so or drawing a line across? So when I'm marking it, I will give you one score for what is written for 20 minutes and then another score for the final product in the end. Okay, so I will not stipulate which one you are supposed to do. Pick one of the five that we've gone through today and complete it as your work. Okay, it will be due for submission the following lesson. Right, thank you. Have a good day ahead.